Battlefield 5, we meet again. It's been over a year since all of that debacle and my promise to drop the franchise with the latest title. I've respected that choice of mine, and today I'd like to finally try this trash to see, is it worth the attention or not? Hello everyone, Chris back again with you in Gaming Zone, and today I'm finally ready to combat my arch nemesis that I bought for $5. Let's get started. I will say this straight, today I wanted to do something different than usual reviews and ranting. A whole 30 minutes dedicated to analyze this game and give it a verdict, or trashing it to the point of being ashamed for its existence. Ever since this garbage was announced, I knew it will become an eventual dumpster fire, with people throwing trash at me for marking that. At this moment in time, this game hit rock bottom, and I don't expect a sudden revival of it in the long run, even with the new content. And yes, the hopes for the new game are even lower than before, not a big surprise for everyone. This massive rant and discussion will be divided in parts, so I'm going to drop some timestamps for you to choose the section that you want to watch. With all of this covered, let's start the digging. Let's start with the roots of the problem. Marketing and target audience. Battlefield 5 was announced way back in 2018, and to everyone's surprise, the reveal event and trailer were complete train wrecks. My reaction to this absolute cringe fest is still available on the channel. Here are some snippets of it. Because I would be greatly censored by this. But man, what the f is Battlefield 5? Seriously, what the f is it? I had enough of just being gentle, so you little won't bomb on me. What this game is going to be release. You didn't hear me, and now it's I was right. And right now we see Battlefield 5 getting I'm not kidding, it's if it's sold less than Battlefield 1, it's very problematic. As you can see, my opinion was very negative, and that is softly said. Same was applied to half of the community. Lots of rants and discussions popped up on YouTube and other forums. An eventual fracture followed within the community, and people chose to skip the title entirely and move back to Battlefield 4, and that World War I dumpster. Can you imagine this thing being a World War II game? Along the lines, some people actually gave feedback to save the game from being hated by everyone. From here, things got really bad and turned sour. EA, being of course the, quotes, best publisher out there, had the power to say, if you don't like it, don't buy it. Because why not? This statement was given by Patrick Sutherland, which sometime before the release of this particular train wreck, quit the company with a bonus and good severance package. Let's not forget the everyone's Battlefield party to call out the other side of community toxic, even if majority would give constructive criticism. The trailer was disliked to oblivion, following with some attempts to fix the problems created by removing all of those steampunk thingies out of the game. The damage was, however, already done, with a huge chunk of players completely ignoring the title. Instead of concentrating on the creation of a quality product, DICE thought of minorities and other useless stuff. I've ranted a lot about this in my channel, about the takes that this studio took, and every damn release they don't take the feedback seriously. Going to say this straight, I'm covering DICE Studio from Sweden, not the Los Angeles department. The game was marketed featuring new live service style updates, compared to the usual season pass system we used to know with previous releases. That made some people happy, but not me and some other people. A similar idea was first applied to Battlefront 2. And you know what happened to that, right? In its first months of release, it was destroyed for aggressive monetization practices. In the marketing of Battlefield, features such as Tides of War were promised, events that brought new content. Basically free DLC for everybody. War Stories made a sad return, cooperative was announced, and many more things. Promises are promises, and after all the problems with Battlefield 1 and Battlefront 2, I lost any goodwill and hopes for the studio. Will everything release as they promised in the marketing? Let's find out next. Now with the coverage of marketing, and it being a complete disaster, let's talk about alpha and beta phases. This is where it seriously gets problematic. Sadly, I don't have any footage of alpha and beta testing anymore, so I'll use some of my older videos as B-roll, along with retail gameplay. After all of the meltdowns I had in the channel related to this train wreck, I still received access to alpha trial in June 2018. For everyone to understand, this version was far more stable compared to open beta, and at some points in lifetime, even the retail. Although missing huge portions of content, it was playable, even an enjoyable experience if retrospecting. I still met this product with a cold attitude, because I couldn't forget the rough responses and coming later tactics received from the publisher. Overall, the emotions were on the positive side, with gameplay being a mix of Refractor and Frostbite games. But things have changed to worse after the release of beta. There was a bug with urgent customer support where you could get the 3 days of early access for free, and most of the people exploited that bug to start playing it earlier. Upon loading up the game, everything was offline, as people started to DDoS the potato servers of EA. After all of that was finished, the project was finally playable. And what have I discovered after returning? A pile of garbage. Everything that was reported in alpha was at best slightly addressed. Everything else ran completely awful. The performance I had in the build was horrible, and lots of people reported that. Overall, the beta didn't impress me with its shape of a debug build, and my final choice was to skip this title entirely. Some of the people though accepted this and moved on to purchase the retail, in hopes of a stable release. Before I start covering that, I'd like to mention the things that developers promised to feature in their release version. Solder drag, competitive, battle royale, single player, test range, more multiplayer maps, server rental, and more. Guess how many came to fruition? Let's not forget, the game was also delayed for a month, being a first not releasing on schedule, aka October. 20th November 2018. The game launched, and what did it contain, I was wondering. Upon talking with my friends that decided to play the game, here's what they said to me. 4 half-assed war stories that nobody cared about, 8 boring multiplayer maps, 2 of which were from alpha and beta versions of the game, and that was basically it. What? Did you expect something more? Well, too bad for you. DICE at best efforts released about 25% of what the final product was supposed to be, and everything promised by the developers was either missing or coming soon, trademark included. The game's launch ended up a complete train wreck, as I originally said and expected it to be. Promised features were postponed, some even missing, or others were entirely cancelled and dropped. Indeed, a product worth of $80 at the release. All review aggregates of course were purchased by EA to post somewhat positive marks for it, not a big surprise. Meanwhile, the community was still divided, some loving this fantastic end product, some hating it to the point of constant ranting, just like me with Blade's Edge cringe. The big Battlefield YouTubers did what they usually do, being the typical ballsack washing machine of EA and receiving revenue from the Game Changers program. The saddest thing of them all, everyone basically accepted this garbage, a product that was basically in a pre-alpha stage. Even Battlefield 3 beta featured more content, and I should mention that software was given away for free. This of course excludes the single player mode. I'm not even counting war stories, a sad attempt to create a campaign for this wannabe shooter. What's more interesting? Battlefield 5 after 2 weeks post-launch had a sale. 2 weeks, 50% off both standard and deluxe. Man, I was glad for my intuition, and I didn't purchase it at launch. Honestly saying, I did pre-order the game, and thank goodness I refunded it. Now for the longest waited part of this video, the rant everyone was waiting for. Starting with single player part of this game. As you can see, war stories sadly made a return in this title. There is nothing to enjoy out of this train wreck, with broken promises and bleak future, at that time at least. DICE promised that with each Tides of War DLC release, war stories will have some story additions. But, in the end, only The Last Tiger was added, and it was confirmed to be the final edition. I am going to describe shortly the experiences on these stories. The background should feature some random gameplay from those. Let's begin. First level I encountered was called Prologue, basically an introduction to this World War II setting, the events after Battlefield 1. This is one of the good levels from the game, bringing homage to previously mentioned title, also having some cool action scenes. Besides that, it's a simple introduction level, nothing special. Nordlies. The levels of political correctness started to grow from here on out. Set in 1942's Norway, not the best period of the country. The story focuses on a girl fighting very hostile fellas. Sadly, not allowed to name them. Shortly said, you'll blow up something, take down people, ski, fall in frozen water, exist, spot stuff, and do random cringe that I honestly don't even care about. The problem here is the inaccurate portrayal of this story. In the real world, an actual squad did this operation, not a single woman with a ski living deep in the mountains. Pretty sad to see a potential cool story down the drain in favor of inclusion. Tiralier, another story which is quite decent, but has some flaws in it. Story covers the Senegalese people landing in Normandy during 1944. Frankly said, gameplay wise it's similar to the first level I encountered, but without the skiing mechanic. There are also some messages about erasing people from history, and that is honestly very sad to hear. Although such horrible things have happened, at least the representation in the game is pretty damn good. Under no flag is the typical dumpster fire. We have a prisoner converted into a troop along with his former prison boss. A wannabe duo basically fights an entire German squadron. To everyone's surprise, they managed to win. One, if not the worst stories that ever came out from DICE in general. Finally, The Last Tiger. A good story about a tank commander rethinking about that insane ideology. which I'm not going to name. Although at the release it was a bugged mess, the situation improved with patches and DLCs. I recommend to everyone who purchased the game to play only this chapter, as it's one of the best out of the bunch. And that is it. As you can see, some of these stories have political charge, which is not the best move to do in games. It's a damn shame that after all the criticism Battlefield 1 received related to single player, DICE still delivered subpar experience for players interested in this side of the game. Every chance of potential is wasted on random trash nobody asked or cared about, later to be forgotten in a couple of hours. Comparing this to Battlefield 4, the difference is like night and day. And trust me, the aforementioned game has an average campaign, and just comparing it to these World War II stories makes it worthy of some Oscar award. You get the message. War stories are a complete joke, and only some of them have good story in them. Moving on. Let's talk about the yet another train wreck called Cooperative. This mode was promised for launch during the horrendous marketing days, but after the game's delay, the final release was set in February 2019. To sum up the experience, a complete letdown, soon followed by disappointment from the entire community. Everyone expected an experience somewhat similar to Battlefield 3, or even better with fresh new ideas. To refresh everyone's memories, Battlefield 3 had a completely different campaign set in this mode, featuring two buddy system playing as a whole. You fought through enemies, doing objectives and doing other challenges. What have we received in the next generation? A survival in a small hut, blowing up some things, and do other random trash that's more boring than a class at college. If the developers are too lazy to even invest resources to create a good co-op experience, then why even releasing such a thing for Republic in the first place? Ah, of course, not to get sued by false advertisement. I find it curious how everyone still defends this title after all of these remarks. Well, this experience isn't what everyone bought the game for. Players are here for the multiplayer experience. Well, let's discuss about that, shall we? Before covering the vanilla experience of multiplayer, let's look at the innovative Battle Royale game mode called Firestorm. And the innovative part is in quotes. Here we have the default claims. The biggest map in history of Battlefield, has interesting gameplay, and the community requested this feature. And so the list goes on. To fully disclose this, I have a negative view on this type of games after 2017 disaster with Fortnite and PUBG. I understand that it might be something new at the time, but at the moment it's only hurting the community. Anyone remember Radical Heights? A battle royale created on some Unreal Engine store assets with some studio additions. It was pushed out in extreme early access to quickly fund a bankrupt studio. I knew all along that Battlefield 5 would feature such a game mode like this, and I didn't plan to fund the development for such kind of update. Yet, it released in March 2019, a whole 5 months since the launch of the game. What can I say about this thing? Best rounded conclusion is, the mode is dead and barely brought up to the studio. I wanted to feature some footage in the background, but enduring a long waiting queue just to play a mode, where you will die in 5 seconds on landing, is not worth it. From the footage I've seen from other people is default Battle Royale, with small additions and changes, one being the fire ring. This feature destroys anything outside of the map, dynamic destruction crept up to a new level. Besides that, nothing new at all. The game still has a limit of 64 concurrent players, a boundary DICE apparently can't surpass since 2002. The loot pickup system sometimes is janky. It either stays bugged or gets fixed in an update, then to be broken by another patch. Not a big surprise that Firestorm is dead. With this kind of support, it's not a wonder, although it lasted some time, so I give it props to that. And now, the main dish. Original multiplayer Battlefield is known for. Looking at my reviews from the previous modes, this side of the game is the best it can offer. Looking closer, it's still flawed, with problems related to map design and bad spots, such as attrition and bad support. Some maps are concentrated on a single location, creating a story for grand operations, and for other game modes. Well, this quickly fell apart, with broken promises in the upcoming DLCs. Gunplay is the main part that holds this train wreck from turning into a disaster. I didn't play the retail so much, but I can surely say this shooting mechanic is the best out of all games. Previous titles either featured random deviation or had visual recoil, which was annoying to master and look at. No longer come the spray and pray moments, every bullet fired hits the target. Skill matters now, unlike World War I's random luck. Really glad DICE took this in consideration, and I hope they won't change this with the next installment of this series. As for vehicles, these have been nerfed really bad with this title. It's interesting how these were perfect during Battlefield 4 days, and how they screwed up that system. In the past, players used to run away when encountering an enemy tank. Now they just rush these giant things, since they blow up without much effort put in. It takes a couple of shots to destroy the tanks, and I fear to think about planes and simple cars. Of course, it's that case again when the studio is reinventing the wheel. Why having a solid vehicular gameplay if you can make aluminium barrels with wheels? Let's cover quickly the game modes featured here. Lightning round starts. Conquest, the good old default game mode, nothing particular. Breakthrough, Frontlines makes a return, this time on acid. Team Deathmatch, typical run and gun rounds with lots of meat. Rush, old timer since Bad Company, but completely wasted with new games. Grand Operations, operations with sub game modes. And that's it. Everything else is not important at all, with co-op and Firestorm already covered before. For the biggest negative, attrition, an idiotic decision to leave players with low amount of ammunition at start, forcing people to always find crates and medpacks. This mechanic is really dumb. Since when did soldiers go empty-pocketed in a conflict? Is this World War II or some GameStop cosplay? It's understandable that developers want to make people cooperate, but if it's forced, you lose any passion and interest in the game. Not everyone is going to pay attention. I have some stable ideas on how to make the team more united, but as always, DICE doesn't care at all. Well, too bad for them. If it wasn't for this mechanic, people wouldn't be complaining so much. Also, people defending this trash, take your head out from your This is no longer a realism-focused game. From its reveal it wasn't realistic, so shut up about that type of gameplay. And I'm going to wrap up this review with the DLCs that arrived with Tides of War. Not a secret, this live service from start is haunted with problems, and I've even witnessed serious people quitting the game because of this horrible support. I still remember the fight over Season Pass, since the situation with the previous live service game ended up pretty bad. I'm looking at you, Anthem. I know you still exist. Even if the idea of premium still existed, I don't think the content would be worth it. Just looking at the co-op and Chapter 4 makes me fear how the paid content would look like. Let's start with Fall of Europe. Oh wait, that was cancelled a long time ago. Yeah, as you can see, the promises start to fall apart. Ain't that interesting? Chapter 1 was called Overture, and it was a boring start for a boring journey. There were promised maps, weapons, game modes, and a long list of content. What was added, you might ask? 2 maps, The Last Tiger War Story, 5 weapons, and a sad skin. Let's cover those quickly. Firestorm, first map added post-release, and it was forgotten shortly afterwards. An open field that destroys infantry, and vehicles blow up faster than SC4. It was also available only in Conquest, one of the weak locations to be added during the controversial days. Practice range, most disappointing thing that ever released, along with cooperative game mode. Comparing this to Battlefield 4's testing range, this version is basically nothing. Instead of being allowed to do anything that your heart pleases, you do plain and boring missions. Why releasing such noob training thing really late after launch? Its purpose was hindered because of these dumb choices. Nobody even remembers about this thing now. Only the menu bar can be spotted in the list. And of course for the Easter eggs. About weapons I'm silent, since 50% of those were copy-pasta from Battlefield 1. There are a lot of assets recycled from previous game, highlighting again the studio's position towards this one. There are some new guns added, thankfully, but I haven't unlocked them yet to fully state my impressions here. Second content edition for the game was Lightning Strikes DLC. Compared to the first edition, this release was something serious and worth praising, although some of its content was at best average. In this drop, co-op was introduced, along with some vehicles and weapons. Rush and Squad Conquest made a return during that period, among with them featuring new Grand Operation, linking some maps storyline. Glad to say that only Ross Mark III was the only copy-pasta addition to this part. Overall, this update was pretty solid. Here comes the biggest content drop for the game, well before Chapter 5 made an entry. Trial by Fire introduced the disappointment called Firestorm, the Battle Royale mode, along with some ridiculous game modes and 2 co-op levels on the same boring maps. 2 new maps have made an entry, first being the Firestorm location and Mercury, a mediocre map with beautiful locations. For weapons, the situation is better, original content and a copy-pasta from Battlefield 1. Throw in 2 melee weapons and that does the deal. Halvoy, the Battle Royale map. Another claim comes from DICE. This thing is the biggest map to be added in Battlefield series. While it's great that new lengths can be reached, does it have good gameplay? From what I heard and seen from other players, the fast ring progression prevents fully exploring the map. Some regions are weak and have been changed since launch of the game mode, but besides that, nothing new and interesting. Appreciate what you got, because you won't receive any new content for it. That's right. Local changes like PUBG have been finished. Now the map is in final form. Nothing innovative at all. Just the firing, featured destroying objects and building upon progression. Mercury. Another late addition to the game, a location set in Greece. It was meant to be featured in a grand operation solely set on Hellenic land, but the promises were broken again, as usual. While it surely looks pretty cool on the side, gameplay-wise the map is not friendly at all. A lot of verticality affects the enjoyment, and the problems related to visibility became even worse. Well, people paid for such map, so I find no problems. It's a content drop after all. This is probably one of the saddest attempts to even provide players with content during a live service. To call this chapter a dumpster fire is addressing the situation slightly. This was the longest lasting period during Tides of War. It was covered in scandals that nearly killed the game, fake promises, postponing, and other trash. New additions were really weak. 2 maps, 2 of which were promised for the competitive mode, 4 weapons, and god-awful features. And imagine this, all of this content was released in 3 months. 3 months. Also done. The meme, the legend. DICE showed their incompetence with the live service support. This map was already added in the game, during the Lightning Strikes era. It was playable in the Last Tiger story. What can I say? To port a map in multiplayer by simply adding some capture points apparently was too hard of a job, it being postponed for a really long time. Did it release? Yes, at the end of this DLC. Fantastic support from the studio. It truly shows that those developers are capable of creating content. Marita. Yet another vertical map filled with problems. A mediocre addition as usual, I don't even bother to cover this one. Competitive mode. The biggest controversy around this chapter was probably the attempt to create an esport game mode for Battlefield. Imagine this, DICE LA spends resources and works on this mode for over a year. A really big update to make the game more appealing for serious events. Sony also created a big esport event featuring Battlefield 5 in the list. And what EA does at the last moment? Yeah, scrap that, we can do it, we are dropping the idea. I can't believe the incompetence of those people, wasting workforce like that, only for a product to be cancelled and thrown in the trash bin. The remaining small maps planned for the competitive were simply converted to squad conquest. And honestly said, those are not fit for such playstyle, since from the beginning it was focused on esports. The maps themselves are just recreated parts of Firestorm map, one if not the biggest screw-ups I ever seen in the series in general. And now let's cover the Pacific DLC. This is where Battlefield 5 started its redemption tour. At the moment of recording this video, the game took a 180-degree turn, finally focusing on what it should be, instead of providing the cringe-worthy trash seen with previous updates. A proper World War II theme edition that truly deserves praises. For this update, I will create a separate video, since I want to fully cover the route change for the game, and the studio in general. Shortly summarized, this is where everything changes, and I hope it becomes better in the long run. Now, some lines about customization. It's a complete joke, and it needs to be killed with a flamethrower. If Battlefield 1's Apocalypse DLC introduced some JPEG compression quality skins, Battlefield 5 took the cringe to the whole new level. First, the soldier skins. With this garbage applied, it's really hard to differentiate the classes, a sub-feature that everybody used without knowing. In the previous titles, you could identify the class by just looking at the enemy, therefore you picked up the kit that was crucial at the moment. With the new skin system, all you can see are squealing females and disabled male soldiers around. A damn shame that proper World War II skins were not considered, with these ugly things making an introduction. The worst offender is that same skin can be applied to every class, basically killing this feature entirely. With Pacific update though, some quality skins have been added. About weapons I am dead silent, those are at best average. An example being those ribbon ornament guns, where the green tint I've seen since alpha. Yeah, the situation is not good at all, especially since most of them are for Battlefield coins, aka real money. There are a lot of things I still didn't feature in this huge video, and I'm taking in consideration the time it took to record and edit this. I think it's time for a conclusion for this review rant. Battlefield 5 was a complete failure from start, and sadly it still is, even with the brand new Pacific content introduced. Single player is absolute garbage, which is politically charged. Combined arms aka co-op was introduced to protect EA from false advertisement. Firestorm is at best an average take on Battle Royale, which is slowly dying, and the multiplayer we know is trying to hold the game from falling apart. Let's not forget the worst offense, broken promises for the retail release, such as Soul the Drag, Fall of Europe, and lots of content for Chapter 4. In retrospection, I used to despise Battlefield 1 for being a casual game, with a low amount of content that offered small moments of fun, followed by boring repetitive gameplay. Only now I realized DICE is not lazy. They simply didn't have time to polish and create a proper game back in 2016. This World War II wannabe, however, is maintained by new developers that have no idea what to do for the game. Only now they've shown some capabilities with Pacific Update, but they had to ruin it with yet another unnecessary time to kill nerf. Among the lines, EA finally realized that extending the support will help Battlefield 5 a lot, with next installment releasing in 2021. For once in a lifetime, I'm happy that the product was delayed, especially the one developed by DICE. They dropped the ball after Battlefront release, proving the fact that this studio was under high pressure and crunch. Postponing a release was one of my recommendations for the studio, and seeing it happen is something that makes me happy. The critiques and facts are here, everyone. And I don't care what those game changers say about this half-assed product. Battlefield 5 is still a complete failure, with Pacific Update being just a small glimmer of hope. Those shields only damage the game, instead of helping it to grow. Westy especially, being the typical representation of a shield. Ever since 2018, he started doing trash like that, and it's gotten worse with the months passing. Perfect example proving he is still a shill by him trashing Modern Warfare. A decent shooter with some problems, but featuring far better content at the release compared to what Battlefield 5 offered in its entire update cycle. And what do you think he does? He is praising the garbage held together by Spit and Tape, created by DICE. I've said enough about him in 2018's rant. He is not the person I knew anymore, his only interest is in money from game changers and EA, and people still support him to this day. This was a proper final rant, one backed up with arguments and examples. I truly wish that Battlefield 5 would be a worthy replacement to that World War I thing from the past. But the reality is often disappointing. With the new updates and EA's plans for future, some of my hope has been restored. Since 2016 I didn't have any positive looks towards the new Battlefield games. DICE decayed with the Star Wars release in 2015. It's like I woke up from a daydream, finally knowing the sad reality that this franchise is currently in. And it for sure is a bad one. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this massive upload, even if a small amount of people will watch it until the end. Don't forget to leave a like, it supports the channel a lot, myself included. While at it, you can click the subscribe button, and with that done, you will receive latest uploaded content. This was Chris, see you next time.
Hallo. Ist da jemand?